Hi, good morning. Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. We are a community of children, youth, and adults bound not by creed, but by covenant. My name is Catherine Sutton. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a member of the celebrant team. Our church is located on lands that are the traditional territory of the indigenous Iowa peoples who call themselves Bahoche. Other than those of us descended from those indigenous peoples, we all arrived here from someplace else. As we enter this space, let us recommit to understanding the history of the land it occupies and to owning our part in the work of education, reparation, and healing. If you are here with children, feel free to keep them seated with you or take advantage of our We worship space in the back of the auditorium. There will be no religious education programming this morning. Following today's service, our Grief Support Circle facilitators will be holding space in the minister's office at 10:45 a.m. for anyone who would like a little more time to process with others any grief you are experiencing, or just to sit in the company of people who are going through something similar. The Grief Support Circle normally meets on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month from 6 to 7 p.m. Today's forum is at 11 a.m. in Griffin Hall, Volunteer Vocations with Shelley Kaldenberg. And now I'll have Kevin and Steve Herwing up for stewardship testimonial.
For those of you that were here or heard the service last Sunday, you'll know what a tough spot I'm in following Natalie Mason's talk, which is on the back of the stewardship handout you were given today, where she talked about the people in her town on tax night marching down to the strains of William Tell Overture to file their taxes just before the midnight deadline. So that thought's been running through my head all week, and I was thinking maybe the stewardship could have pledge night where we'd have a Dixieland band play when the Unitarians go marching in, and we could all turn our pledge cards in then. In 1989, we began attending First Unitarian Church. Our son Todd was off to his freshman year in college, and our daughter Paige was 8 years old. After attending for several Sundays, we discussed if we should continue our attendance. Paige enthusiastically said, "Yes, because there they let you think." So we have continued being a part of First Unitarian. Members of the congregation have become our neighbors, both literally and figuratively. We are appreciative that members walk their talk, demonstrating that they're not just receiving a Sunday message and going on with their lives. Whether it's Amos, the Pride Parade, Family Promise, the bookworks at Planned Parenthood, pastoral care, reproductive rights, protest at the state capitol, compassion and choices, or dozens of activities and affinity groups, the members of First Unitarian will show up. We are proud to support the church financially to keep the idea of our liberal religious heritage alive. As we see the challenges in the world around us, that work has never been more important. Thank you for being our church family and walking the talk with us.
Our chalice lighting this morning is Life's Sacred Dance by Joanne Giannio. We light this chalice in honor of life's sacred dance of living and dying. May its flame remind us of those who have passed to us fragments of holiness. May it remind us that we, too, are participants in this dance. Our gathering song this morning is number 353, Golden Breaks the Dawn from the Gray Hymnal. Please rise in body or spirit. Our story for all ages this morning is Cry, Heart, But Never Break by Glenn Rinckved, illustrated by Charlotte Party. In the far north, in a small, snug house, 4 children lived with their beloved grandmother, a kindly woman who she had cared for them for many years. Now she had a visitor. Not wishing to frighten the children, the visitor had left his scythe outside the door. All the same, they knew it was Death. Nels, the oldest, and his sister Sonia, closed their eyes, heavy with sorrow. Casper, who was younger, tried to ignore the visitor. But Leah, the youngest, who was always getting into trouble, stared straight at Death. In the quiet, the children could hear their grandmother upstairs, breathing with the same raspy breaths as the figure at the table. They knew Death had come for her and that time was short. Since everyone knew Death's only friend is night, the children quickly made a plan. They would keep Death away from their grandmother by giving him coffee all through the night. At dawn, he would have no choice but to leave without her. So every time Death emptied his cup, Nels would say, "More coffee, sir?" And Death would nod. Death loved his coffee strong and black like the night, and he was happy to sit and rest for a while. Time passed. Finally, Death was ready. He placed his bony hand over his cup to signal no more. Then Leah, who had been watching Death all night, reached out and took his hand. "Oh, Death," she said, "our grandmother is so dear to us. Why does she have to die?" Some people say Death's heart is as dead and black as a piece of coal, but that is not true. Beneath his inky cloak, Death's heart is as red as the most beautiful sunset and beats with a great love of life. Death wanted to help the children understand, so he said, "I would like to tell you a story." And in a strong, sweet voice, he began to speak. Once upon a time, so long ago that only I can remember, there lived 2 brothers. One was called Sorrow, the other Grief. Woeful and sad, they moved up and down their gloomy valley. They went slowly and heavily, and because they never looked up, they never saw through the shadows to the tops of the hills. At the top of these hills, there lived two sisters, Joy and Delight. They were bright and sunny, and their days were full of happiness. The only shadow was their sense that something was missing. They didn't know what, but they felt they couldn't fully enjoy their happiness. Death saw Leah nodding and said, "I think you can guess what happens next." One day the brothers and sisters met. Sorrow fell instantly in love with Delight, and she with him. It was the same for grief and joy. Each couldn't live without the other. After their double wedding and a great celebration, the two couples moved into neighboring houses halfway up and halfway down the hill. This way, the distance to their old homes was the same. They all lived to be very old. When time came to die, grief and joy did so on the same day, as did sorrow and delight. Their happiness together had been so great that they couldn't live without each other. "That's a good story," said Nels. "It is the same with life and death," Death said. "What would life be worth if there were no death? Who would enjoy the sun if it never rained? Who would yearn for a day if there were no night?" The children weren't so sure they hadn't understood Death fully, but somehow they knew he was right. At last, Death stood up. It was time to go upstairs. A line of pale gray was edging away the night. Casper wanted to stop Death, but Nels held him back. "No," Nels said, "life is moving on. This is how it must be." Moments later, the children heard the upstairs window open. Then, in a voice somewhere between a cry and whisper, Death said, "Fly, soul, fly, fly away." The children hurried upstairs. They tiptoed into their grandmother's bedroom. Grandmother had died. The curtains were blowing in the gentle morning breeze. Looking at the children, Death said quietly, "Cry, heart, but never break. Let your tears of grief and sadness help begin a new life." Then he was gone. Ever after, whenever the children opened a window, they would think of their grandmother, and when the breeze caressed their faces, they could feel her touch. In the years that followed, the children lived with their joy and their sorrow, but they always remembered Death's words and took great comfort from their hearts, which grieved and cried, but never broke.
The mission of First Unitarian Church is to grow ethically and spiritually, serve justly, and love radically. Your gifts of time and presence and money make all of this possible. Every week, half of the collection given in the service goes directly to the wider community to support Faith in Action partners. Let's Talk collaborates with the Des Moines Public Schools to help young people resolve conflict. Hawthorne Hill works with unhoused families toward permanent, affordable housing, which is a human right. You may give through the plate as it passes or give online. Thank you.
All right, now I have a script. A church is not a building, but a community. As a community of human hands and human hearts, we come together to share our laughter and our tears, and to bear witness and minister to one another as we struggle with life's sorrows and celebrate life's joys. May we hold in our thoughts and prayers this week Mike and Karen Lauer. Mike is relieved and grateful to be at home following a visit to the emergency room last Sunday. He had some frightening symptoms, which turned out to be pericarditis, a very treatable condition. So thank you to Mike and Karen for sharing that news. Let us now share together the names of anyone we know who could use some special care and attention. You may call the names out loud or type them into the chat. And as we share these names, may the love of this community hold them all. May the light of our community shine on the broken places of the world. May the work of our hands and hearts support, aid, and comfort all those who hunger or thirst for food or water, justice or freedom. May we never look away from when we are needed. May those who are grieving be comforted. May those who are tired find rest. May the broken places be healed. May those who are filled with joy and laughter be abundant. Now, together, we light 3 candles. One for the joys and sorrows we have shared, one for the names we have spoken or written, and one last candle for all the joys and all of the sorrows which are deeply held but remain unspoken here today.
Our first reading this morning is the poem Control by local Des Moines poet William Bortz. I don't believe there is much in this life we can control. We cannot force the clouds to part and make way for abundant light. We cannot will ourselves to some place other than where we currently are. We cannot make people love us, and worse, we cannot make people stay. We cannot make people stay. Even if the space in our palm washes so perfectly around their tender fingers and our tongue wraps so gently around their name, it blooms into an eternity. We cannot make people stay. I lost my grandmother when I was young, before I knew grief, before I understood what it was like to heave and become empty. She was the only person that would chase me around her 2-story home simply because she wanted to see joy in movement. We cannot make people stay. This is not about loss or grieving. It is about empty spaces. It is about how quick we are to set a glowing screen in front of our faces when an overcast sky haunts us. Have you ever dipped your fingers in paint and pressed them to a canvas because you wanted so badly to be a part of something vibrant? Have you ever swallowed a sunset because you couldn't remember what it was like for something so beautiful to end and not have to mourn it? Sometimes the empty space is a name that has folded into past tense. Sometimes it is beginning to understand how something so perfectly present can grow stale. Sometimes it's about praying to a shadow. This is about penance. Shouting the name of what's become absent into the void, it's gone too, so you can wrap it in anger and guilt into returning. Have you ever dusted the headstones becoming weathered in your throat? Do you even need to read the date engraved in old stones in order to wrap your hands around a pain that has made itself a home in you? This is about reckless anger. This is about space. Do you visit yours? Do you acknowledge it? Do you honestly believe there could ever be something light couldn't soften? It is good to reconcile ourselves to our empty spaces. It's good to be at home in them. It's good to bring people into them. It is good to fill them with patient hands that filter the rocks from the soil and find water beneath. This is about control, or rather, how little of it we have. I think what I remember the most from the little time I had with my grandmother is that we were never stationary. We never allowed anything to grow a layer of dust. When a space once filled with a body or a voice empties out, it isn't meant to become a monument of what once was. It isn't meant to grow dark. This is not about empty spaces. There's so little we can control in this life. Aside from how we choose to fill all the spaces that were once occupied and now lie empty, that now lie waiting to be tilled with bare hands, this is about newness and our ability to control whether or not we believe that it exists. Our second reading this morning is From This Here Flesh by Cole Arthur Riley. When I moved to Philly after college, my friends were a group of nuns. I was leading small groups at a quaint Catholic university, and Sister June, worried that I was lonely but never saying so, would invite me for meals and rosary walks. I went with her a handful of times to a prayer labyrinth that she walked weekly. The first time I went, I thought it would be a maze. I was hoping it would be. But prayer labyrinths aren't meant to trap you, and the goal isn't to get out. It's a journey to the center and back again, and the way is long but clear. It's an ancient practice of embodied meditation. Sister June would mumble to herself as we walked the path from different ends. I'd pick leaves and rip them up into smaller and smaller pieces as I made my way. Sometimes when Sister June approached the center, she'd begin to cry. I'd linger awkwardly in places to avoid the center while her mumbles became a gentle wailing. But one time, she just peeked over her shoulder at me and said, "Well, come on then." I entered the center with her, and she slid a photo from her skirt pocket and pressed it flat between her two palms without showing me. "My sister," she said, and she wasn't wiping her tears away. I asked, "Older or younger?" And maybe she knew I just didn't know what else to say, but instead of answering, she said, "I come here to cry for her. And then, let me tell you about her." We walked the path out together as she told me about the love and the loss and how she once and still sometimes hated God. She told me that as she walks to the center, she travels into sadness. As she walks out, she reminds herself she isn't imprisoned by it. We are all born knowing how to cry, but it takes another to teach us how to cry well and with purpose. As we watch our elders cry, we are learning. Sister June taught me how to grieve with my body. She taught me how to feel the tears on my face and not wipe them away. Her rhythm of lament has settled into my soul. At Wisewood, we're collecting stories now to make a prayer labyrinth in the field next to the house. I walk the path and whisper to myself, "You are no shell." I make the pilgrimage into my deepest sorrows, knowing tragedy doesn't own me. Your wails are worthy to be heard. Journey to the center with me now. Together, we won't get lost in despair. Your wails are worthy to be heard. Aren't your eyelids tired of keeping prisoners? Those tears are precious minerals. Lap them up like a medicine. It's called healing. Please join me in singing Voice Still and Small, number 391 in the Gray Hymnal.
Good morning. My name is Elliot Nassif. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I am also a member of the celebrant team And thank you so much, Nick, for that beautiful French horn solo. It filled the space so beautifully. Thanks a lot. And thank you to all of you for being here on this wonky time change, weird Iowa winter storm thing. I appreciate it. So the Reverend Victoria Safford, you might be familiar with her, recently said in a memorial service for a friend of this congregation, "We are companions making our way now through the country of grief, which is of course the country of love, for you can't live in one without the other. The country of grief is the country of love, and you enter through the gates of compassion." I am a lifelong resident of the country of grief. Maybe you are too. I first experienced grief and loss at a few days old when my birth mother relinquished me for adoption. And then again at a month old when the adoption agency handed me off from a foster home to my adoptive parents. Of course, I didn't know it was grief at that time as a baby, and I still wouldn't know that for a couple of decades. My birth mother, Judy, died in June of 2021. I know I started grieving her death before it even happened. I can't pinpoint when. Maybe it was the day before she died when I kissed her goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time. Maybe it was the week before her death when a nurse told me she was in the active dying phase. Maybe a month earlier when she was placed on hospice. Maybe even earlier when I spoke to her on the phone on Easter and she couldn't quite follow the conversation. I was the first person her pastor called when she died. He told me she was gone and I was torn open. The primal, pre-verbal grief I had held inside for so long poured out all at once. People say grief comes in waves, and it did. First as a tsunami bowling me over, then lashing me as her funeral came and went, then my birthday, then hers. Now the waves lap more gently. They still surge sometimes, but they don't threaten to drown me. Sometimes the movement of the waves is soothing like a mother rocking her child. Among the waves is also stillness, and that is holy too. As I was writing this sermon, I found myself hesitating to talk about my personal grief. Is it too intimate? I asked myself. Will it make people uncomfortable? My first sermon, and it's a huge bummer. And then I reminded myself, people need and deserve to have their grief seen, validated, and reflected back at them, me included. And also, this is church, not a comedy club. If you want funny, you'll have to wait a few weeks for Louise Alcorn's service, which he has promised will be funny. What's it about? Fear. Yeah. I often feel like the grief I carry from Judy's death has nowhere to go. It doesn't fit neatly inside a sympathy card or come with easy platitudes. It's messy, it's ambiguous, shrouded. My mentor, Cole Imperi, a thanatologist, coined the term shadow loss to describe those losses that lie in liminal spaces. She defines it this way: shadow loss is a loss in life, not a loss of life. It is a type of loss that has a multifaceted impact on not only the life of an individual, but also the social network in that person's life. Shadow losses may or may not be associated with a death, and most aren't. Shadow losses impact a person's social connections, status in the community, overall well-being, and family relationships. Shadow loss is a non-clinical term. It is not a diagnostic tool. Instead, shadow loss is a term an individual may choose to use to better describe the impact of a particular loss experience. So what does that all mean? Shadow losses might show up as job loss, divorce, estrangement, diagnosis, financial hardship, adoption, a congregation, a beloved community in transition year after year, uncertain of what's to come. More on that later. These losses are real and sharp and sacred and deserve to be grieved. I regularly attend a grief support group and a support group for adult adoptees. And to me, they're pretty much the same thing. In each group, I hear people wonder if their grief is valid, if their grief belongs, if it's welcome anywhere. There's a man in my grief group whose wife is still alive, but dementia has eaten away at the person she once was. In my group for adoptees, a woman tries to understand why, after 10 years of reunification, her birth father has rejected her. For them, there is no grave to visit, no endless parade of casseroles arriving at their door. I hear them compare their losses, and I find myself comparing my loss to others who have lost parents. But comparison is of no use. Comparison is a barrier to connection, to those gates of compassion Victoria illustrated in that past service. Grief is not a competition, thank goodness. This is all to say, your grief is welcome here. There is plenty of space for our collective and individual losses to commingle in all of their complexity. William Bortz explores the complexities and contradictions of grief in his poem Control. It can be uncomfortable to hold the tension of things we conceptualize to be opposites: lightness and darkness, emptiness and fullness, tenderness and toughness, connection and solitude, motion, stillness, decay, new growth, fertility and barrenness, holding on to control and letting go. So how do we reconcile those opposites? Are they really opposites at all? Where does grief come in? Grief does not and cannot exist in a vacuum or on opposing poles. It exists alongside and mixed in with many other emotions and experiences. Grief and anger, grief and beauty, grief and hope, grief and love. Grief is love. I see that love anthropomorphized in joy and grief from our story for all ages. I picture them bickering over when to turn out the lights at night, or whether to watch a comedy or a tragedy. I picture them making coffee for each other, 1 cup dark and bitter, 1 cup milky and sweet, complementing and completing each other, tempering each other, and knowing they need each other. Bortz writes, "It is good to reconcile ourselves to our empty spaces. It's good to be at home in them. It is good to bring people into them. It is good to fill them with patient hands that filter the rocks from the soil and find water beneath." How do we reconcile those empty spaces, then have the courage to fill them again? I see that courage in our small glimpse of Sister June from our second reading. I see how her tears flow with unfettered honesty and ease. When Cole isn't sure what to say and asks, "Was your sister older or younger?" Sister June doesn't falter. She doesn't make it awkward or change the subject like I probably would. She replies, "Let me tell you about her." An invitation. How beautiful to invite others into our grief. How beautiful to share our losses, to speak their names and clasp their weathered photos in our hands. I sense that Sister June's loss is not fresh, it is deeply settled, rooted in her, part of her. Cole says Sister June taught her how to grieve with her body. Where does our resistance to embody our grief come from? To hold back tears, stiffen our upper lip, clench our fists against the waves of grief. Why not let the waves wash over us? Riley asks, "Who taught you to rush past your own sorrow? Grief isn't linear. Take the time when you need it. You can bear witness to the pain without being consumed by it." Bearing witness to me often looks like asking myself the question, what does my grief need? Maybe it needs music, maybe it needs a cup of tea or something a little stronger, maybe it needs to run away for a little while, maybe it needs connection with others grief so we may grieve together. Bortz writes elsewhere, "Grief is a communion we take separately, but eat and drink together." One of the most potent experiences I've had of grieving in communion, in community, happened in November of 2021. My college band director, Dr. Joan D. Albuquerque, had died unexpectedly that September at age 54, a bright light, just a wonderful person. And without prompting or hesitation, current band members, alumni, and members of Joan's family organized a reunion in her memory. Around 70 of us, maybe more, gathered in Decorah to play Joan's favorite pieces of music, pieces we had all played under her at one point or another in her decade at Luther. Some of us had never played together, but we became one band, one family for those few hours. It didn't matter if we fumbled through tough passages or weren't perfectly in tune. We still made magic. We witnessed each other. We shared stories and memories. That day was a gift born out of our collective grief. This congregation is no stranger to collective grief and loss. There have been tough feelings and tough words, tender ones too. What may seem like the airing of grievances may actually be the airing of grief, letting it breathe. I've seen the people in this congregation hold each other and companion each other through and alongside grief. I saw it last week during our forum, where there were brave, hopeful, anxious, lively conversations around what we hope to see from an interim minister. I hear it in some of the music the choir sings, like Craig Hella Johnson's Requiem, which, by the way, moved me to join the choir. I saw it in dozens of candles lit in remembrance at last year's longest night service. I feel it when we sing Comfort Me and give voice to our joys and concerns. I see how we show up for each other, even when it isn't easy. And I know that change isn't easy. I know we can't make people stay. I know that when people leave, it can feel personal, can feel utterly destabilizing and unmooring. Someone beloved to me recently reminded me that loss and leaving is not always abandonment. I know it can feel like it. I am primed to feel abandoned. It comes with the territory of being a resident of the country of grief and love, but I promise it's not always abandonment. I know this community to be welcoming, to be strong and headstrong, to be full of wonder and open to possibility. We will walk to the center of that labyrinth and back, hand in hand, over and over, sometimes crying, sometimes grieving, sometimes not. And we won't get lost in despair, just as Riley wrote. Together, we won't get lost in despair. I'll leave you with these words from Rebecca Stoltfuss, president of Goshen College, spoken at a convocation after the community had suffered multiple losses in a short period of time. Some years ago, I was going through a long period of grief, and in that process, I learned that I could be grieving and funny. I could be sad and learning. I could still laugh. And having fun and learning and laughing and playing alongside our grief is not disloyal to our loss. It is being wholly human. This pattern of growth through loss is what nature teaches us season upon season. The earth, her cycles, her gravity, her firm foundation beneath us is a teacher. And the soil is good here. The soil is good here, friends. May it be a soft place to land. Let's hold space and hold silence together for just a moment. Please rise in body or spirit to sing hymn number 412 from the Gray Hymnal, Let Hope and Sorrow Now Unite. This is Enduring Blessing by Jan Richardson. What I really want to tell you is just to lay this blessing on your forehead, on your heart. Let it rest in the palm of your hand, because there is hardly anything this blessing could say, any word it could offer to fill the hollow. Let this blessing work its way into you with its lines that hold nearly unspeakable lament. Let this blessing settle into you with its hope more ancient than knowing. Hear how this blessing has not come alone, how it echoes with the voices of those who accompany you, who attend you in every moment, who continually whisper this blessing to you. Hear how they do not cease to walk with you, even when the dark is deepest. Hear how they encompass you always, breathing this blessing to you, bearing this blessing to you still.